Okay, so this is the auteur theory. Auteur is a French term that means author. First, a little bit about the origin and definition of auteur theory, which is also known as auteurism. This is a term coined by François Truffaut, a 1950s filmmaker and film theorist. According to him, if a director's film reflects the director's personal creative vision, we are in the presence of an auteur. Now, this is particularly simple, but we got to pay attention to it. This means that not every director is an auteur. Okay? Not every director has the power of conveying his or her personal creative vision in a film, because not every director is the author of a film. Okay? Traditionally, we think of the author of the film as a director, but definitely not in the sense that a novelist is the author of a novel, right? Or a sculptor is the author of a sculpture. So a director may be the author of a film if and only if he or she has that creative power to make all important decisions about the filmmaking process. And this is quite difficult to find because most directors don't have that kind of power. These are some conflicting views about auteur theory. First, there's the question of whether or not a director has open artistic aspirations, because you could be the director of a film and simply just, you know, you have been hired to direct a film that has been written by somebody else, um, that corresponds to the visions and objectives of a production company, whose actors have been casted by somebody else. It will be edited by somebody else. So, does the director actually have open artistic aspirations? That's the first question to ask. And also, does the director have full control over his or her film? That's another thing, because you may have artistic aspirations. You may see yourself as an artist, and when you're given the job of directing a film, you say, well, this is going to be my film and this is the way I want to do it, but can I do it? Like, will the producers allow me to do that? So this is tricky, when it comes to identifying a director as an auteur. Another conflicting point of view is the difference between art films and popular films. Art films are those that are created as works of art, usually written, directed, produced by the same person. So here, it's easy to identify an author of the film. The director, who's also probably the producer or the writer, create this film, usually an independent film, as a work of art. Okay? Whereas in the case of popular films, they usually respond to more commercial views. Big companies are the ones that produce those films, and they hire actors, they hire casting directors, they hire directors and cinematographers and production designers. So there's a whole bunch of people involved in the making of these films, and little room is left for a director to make creative decisions. And then those directors would not be considered auteurs. There are two schools of auteur theory that have different views of how to identify an auteur. For one of them, an auteur may be identified through the thematic consistencies and the meanings that he or she conveys across his or her films. So first of all, it's not possible to identify a director as an auteur by watching only one of his or her films. We need to watch different films by the same director to try and determine if there are meanings that are similar from one movie to the other, that there are motifs that are similar, that are certain patterns in terms of content. The other school says that we should be also looking for these patterns and consistencies, but not in the meanings or themes, but in the style, in the mise en scène, in the visual aspects of the film. So if we find different films by one filmmaker that have to show, that show some consistency in terms of style and mise en scène, then we're might have found an actual auteur. Some other conflicting views. Well, first, what we already said, the director does not have full control over his work. Actually, not the best, not the most artistic of directors has complete control over his or her film unless he is the one that holds the camera, he is the one that edits, he is the one that directs the actors and does absolutely everything. And that's pretty much impossible, right? When it comes to making a film, it's not the same as writing a poem, right? Nobody doubts that the author of a poem is the person who wrote the poem. And there's only one person conveying an artistic point of view through that poem. It's not the same for films. There are producers that have the money, right, to make the film. That's a very important aspect to consider. There are camera people, there are actors that produce a lot of noise around the making of a film. There are many points of view, multiple factors, different contributions, and the director's contribution is only one of the many contributions that are put into the making of a film. So in this sense, even if you're a very artistic director and have artistic aspirations as a director, chances are you won't have the final say, right? And the actual product, the film that is produced in the end will be the result of the contributions of all these people. Now, all of this is in opposition with the auteur theory, because the auteur theory establishes that there must be an author of the film. And the question then is, who is that author? Okay, I'm gonna go quickly through this slide. Is the difference between auteur and metteur en scène that I don't think it's so relevant at this point, but let it suffice to say that it's a metteur en scène is a person who takes charge of all the visual elements of the film, and that's not necessarily the auteur. The auteur must go beyond the stylistic elements and combine the two aspects that the two schools of theory mentioned before favored. So an auteur pays attention not just to the visual and stylistic elements of the film, but also to the content of the film as well, and the semantic meanings that it conveys. Okay. Now, the structural approach. The structural approach requires that we do not see the obvious characteristics of a director's work as the defining characteristics of his auteurism. We will be looking for hidden motifs, patterns that are formed from one movie to the next, right across films by the same author, the same director. Are there any hidden motifs? Are there any patterns formed? Is there any particular structure that we identify across films? So this is why we will try and watch at least 2 films by the same director to try and determine if he or she is actually an auteur or not. Because some directors may have some decision-making power, but not all. But if we find those consistencies between or across films by the same director, we might be finding characteristics of the auteur theory in this director's work, even if we cannot fully identify or characterize that director as an auteur. So, as I said before, it's important to pay attention to the structure of a group of films by one director. Ideally, the whole corpus, that is, all of the films directed by the same director. This is not possible, obviously, in this course, so we'll be trying to watch at least 2 by different authors or directors. We should be looking for resemblances, but also differences and oppositions, because it is sometimes in those differences and oppositions that we may find patterns. And everything else is secondary in this type of structural analysis of films. Now, just to summarize, keep in mind that not all directors are auteurs, but some of them might stand out because throughout their works, they convey patterns and meanings and themes and motifs, or stylistically the use of the camera in one way or another, collaboration with the same actors from film to film, um, decisions that are made in the editing process, etc. So, from this theory, what we will be doing is looking at different films by the same director and try and determine if you can find those patterns or motifs that allow you to affirm, right, or to say that a given director is actually an auteur. So, thank you.